everyone. Today I'm going to just launch into my second episode of the D&D Basics series I'm doing. It's a very requested series for getting into the game and whatnot. I mean, there might still be stuff that more experienced players and whatnot. And today's episode is about making your first character. Or second or third. I mean, it's one of your early ones. It's like with the past video about like kind of the general getting into it. What is it? I am going to be keeping a lot of the information very general. I'm not going to be like referencing specific mechanics and things like that. Specific to like additions and stuff like that. It's going to be very high level. High level in terms of abstract, not high level as in I would not recommend your first character in your first campaign starting at honestly not level 1. Just because it adds extra complexity that you don't need. So, yeah. Words that mean things. Talking, sorry. Okay. But yeah, but it's gonna be there. It is aimed for Dungeons and Dragons, although it can work for other campaigns. Although, for something like character creation can, what you're looking for, it can vary a lot. Where the kind of stuff you're looking for in D&D is different from what the process might be if like you're playing like Vampire the Masquerade or in any number of Call of Cthulhu and things like that. But it's meant for things like D&D and Pathfinder, Exalted, even like more sci-fi things like Shadowrun. A lot of this core tenets still can hold true. But I mean, it's mostly geared towards Dungeons and Dragons, so medieval fantasy style. But yeah, so first and foremost is the best advice I can give to you is talk to your DM, communicate with your DM, and largely the rest of the group. If you're a new player, honestly, your DM is probably going to be the person guiding you, teaching you, guiding through this process, and they'll have a lot of information for you, and they'll help you in it and let you know what they're looking for and whatnot. This is something that isn't as much in your control, but I'd recommend bringing it up if they're not having already. But I find character creation goes best, especially for if there's new players in the group, even if they are experienced players, is doing it as a group. Just having everyone building their characters at the same time, like hanging out, whether it be online or if everyone can't meet up, or just having your first session being everyone hanging out for a few hours and just sitting down and building your character. And the reason I suggest this is there's lots of reasons. One, it's fun hanging out with people. Friends are nice. I wish I had any. That's not fair, I have friends, but yeah, no, it's a good time to it's good to get a feel for the group a feel for the group in like a low stress situation, because your first actual session is kind of a stressful thing, because it's like, I gotta like roleplay and I have so many different things to keep track of, and this is like a nice low stress environment to maybe get to know anyone in the group that you don't know already. And so that first session isn't the first time you're meeting some of them, so that's just useful to have. Secondly, especially if you're like the only new person, everyone approaches things from different ways, and if you're just having one person teach you what doing, you only get kind of like one perspective in terms of like strategies and whatnot, and having multiple people like get multiple insights and stuff like that, and they can build off each other, and that helps. Even if there are other new players, it helps that the DM can teach you kind of all at once. And also, other new players might have questions like that you may have not thought of, but still you can benefit from anyway. It's just like school. And it also makes it easier on the DM so they don't have to explain these things multiple times. So, yeah. But yeah, it's also just as a group, and even if everyone's experienced, I recommend doing character creation as a group, because it lets you coordinate, like, okay, who's could be the tank, who's could be the healer, and things like that, which you can coordinate there. But also, it lets you interlace, like, story and, like, aspects and stuff like that, where you can have a more organic, like, story network, where, like, when you're brainstorming ideas, and it can be like, okay, like, do we want our characters to know each other? Like, what's our relationship there? And you can kind of, like, bounce each other ideas, and the DM can be there to help, like, provide, like, world info for, like, what's going on in the world and whatnot. And it's just harder to do that if not everyone is there. And it can really give you a good jumping off point from where I'm getting into the first session. Because one of the hardest things about starting a game from a DM perspective is, like, figuring out that you, like, because there is a reason that, like, why are these characters working together and sticking together. Like, the lazy thing to do is say you're an established group and yada yada yada. But even then you have the question of, like, what is your relationship to each other? And just being able to create your characters at the same time and have that relation helps a lot. So, and I mean, also as a new player, like, you get to see how other people are building and things like that, and that can be very beneficial. But even if you don't, I would highly recommend, like, at least doing it with, walking through it with your DM, or one of the other players. And even if you can't do that, words, I mean things. You should be in constant contact with them and ask lots of questions, because it's a complex game, and there's bound to be things that come up, especially for your first character. Words that mean things. So, yeah. Be sure to communicate with your DM. If your DM is good, they'll let you know any, like, background world info going on. Or if nothing else, it's the simple pitch. Like, for generic RPG, like, the thing I tell my players is that, like, kind of like what I say, like, what I'm looking for their characters is that, like, most things are fine. This is a world of overplay and fair fantasy stereotypes. You don't have to be those, but it definitely fits. It isn't, like, bad if you just want to play up your stereotypes. So, like, half-orc barbarian and your elven ranger and your halfling rogues and whatnot like that. Those really fit in this world. And based on the world, like, the world can give you a jumping on point for things to do, and they'll also tell you any restrictions. Like, it's like, based on the story I've planned, I don't want any of you to be halflings, or I want you all to be halflings, or, like, there aren't really many arcane spellcasters here, and things like that, where if you know if there's any restrictions or limitations that you need to be aware of when building your character. Be sure to, like, look over what options there are available to you in terms of, you probably don't, for your first character, don't look beyond, like, class and race options, just because, I don't know, it's, you can look deeper into, like, different things like that, but, then it leads you down to the plot hole of my next piece of advice is, while you do look into them and have things in mind, don't be married to an idea. Because it's one of those things where it's like, it's bad when everyone comes into the session and everyone wants to play the wizard. And it's like, not everyone can be the wizard. So, like, don't try not to marry yourself to a character concept or something like that. Like, there will be other campaigns to play this character that you've dreamed up. And just be able to be flexible. I'm not saying don't push for being, like, if you want to play something, like, let people know that, like, hey, I'd really like to do this, but be willing to thing. And also, a lot of concepts can be worked to be a different class via reskinning, which is essentially taking a mechanic and being like, okay, I'm going to take this mechanic and all the balancing, but I'm going to change the lore for it. Like, an easy reskin would be like, not necessarily, like, a classic reskin I do is, like, in a world where, like, the gods have abandoned them and there's really no divine magic, you might be like, I want to play a cleric-like character, but I'm actually like, in lore, I'm like a wizard who specializes in this, like, I'm a specialist wizard who my specialty happens to be what is normally to cleric divine magic, and it's a reskin. Like, some things like might have mechanical differences, but for all these purposes, mechanically you're a cleric, but lore-wise you still might be a wizard. So that's like a good thing to like talk about if you want to be like, you want to study tomes and carry things like that, but you don't want to be but someone's already taking the wizard role and the party needs a healer, you could do that. But again, also make sure your DM's cool with that, and if they're a good DM, they'll usually let it. And also, it depends on the group, but also talk to the group and make sure you know what power level people are building for. Like, is everyone in the group going to be min-maxing all their characters? Min-maxing is a thing where you essentially are just trying to build the most powerful character possible, mechanically, and doing that there, or you kind of just all having like average power level, or use purposefully being like low power level, and things like that. I typically tell my players to just go with what would make sense for your character, not necessarily as what the most powerful. Like, what would your character go for? Like, what spell would they choose when they're leveling up, or things like that. Choose the more fun, flavorful option when given the choice. I mean, like, don't choose things that are like obviously bad and counterproductive, but I'm not a fan of min-maxing, but that's just not my playstyle. But be aware of what the playstyle is, and if it is a bunch of min-maxers, look online for builds and things like that. That's really not a campaign style I have much experience with, so this probably isn't the video to talk about how to min-max, because it's not something I like doing, and yeah, it's not something I advocate for because it doesn't lead to super interesting storytelling and characters and things like that. Yeah, but on that vein, we're talking about classes, also, words and things, in a lot of the player's handbooks, race will come before class, but usually you should probably choose your class first before you choose your race, just because, I don't know, it's your class is honestly more important to mechanically how your character works. While race is almost a lot of more story based. Like, sure, some races go better with some classes than others, but that isn't. You don't necessarily need to like make that influence your choice. Like, I love my halfling paladins like none other. Like, it's great, and things like that. So, and that's a good segue to the next session, which is choosing your race. So, as you know, probably, I mean, I'd be surprised if you didn't, but D&D has a bunch of different races, so like elves, dwarves, half-orcs, humans, gnomes, and all that. So they're just essentially the different, like, people you can play as. There are also less, like, the standard fantasy ones. There's some, like, that are, like, so you have the core group, which is, like, the core fantasy stuff, which is essentially humans, elves, half-elves, dwarves, halflings, gnomes, and half-orcs. Am I missing any? But that's typically considered to be, like, the core, like, what these are, what the player races are. D&D over the last few years had like some tangent ones that make sense as something like tieflings, Asmar, and those sort of things, like the Drow to an extent, which are kind of like the next year out, where like they're D&D staples, but they're not like as like the common. And then you get to just weird things like the oh god, also blank, but like catfolk or kitsune or grouply or things like that, where it's like these weird things which are interesting, but I would highly recommend not choosing them as a first character. And this is something I think a lot of people, especially new players, come into, where they want to be like, I want to play like a cat person, or I want to play, or something like that, where like they want to play this really weird outlandish thing, where it does have a problem where because they're so weird, no one really has any base knowledge of them. I think one of the reason there is a reason there is this core group of races is that like they work the best. Like everyone like kind of like knows the tropes around elves and how elves behave. And granted, not all elves fit into that mold, but that gives more character to those elves because they do not fit into the snare mode of elves. Whereas when you're playing a catfolk, are catfolk just supposed to act like cats, or what is the nuanced personalities and relations? Like, we know kind of like the stereotypical like elf dwarf relations, but like what's the relation between like catfolk and elves? Like that baseline isn't there. And it makes role playing harder, and it makes almost distinctive characters harder. Oops, I'll have to fix that in editing. Just put my knuckle. And it varies from game to game, but I've had groups that like just end up being like just a menagerie of all these weird races in this world, which is populated by like the core races. And I don't know, it just it almost then feels like then those choices almost cease to matter because they don't actually add to any of the characterization of your character. So yeah. There goes my little rant about players not choosing core races. I'm not saying like never choose them, but especially for your first two characters where you're still getting into like a lot of the role play and everything, stick to them. Like, which then segues into my next topic, which is gimmicks are not bad. Like when beyond mechanics, you should be thinking about like character personality and things like that, and motivations and whatnot. And in writing, especially a lot of like mid-level writers are given the advice of like, oh, make sure all your characters are deep and nuanced and have all these things. But honestly, gimmicks work for a reason. Where it's and not even writers, but you actually find this in magicians, like people who do like card tricks and whatnot, where a lot of people who get into this sort of thing start with like fun like gimmick tricks, which like I mean we're talking about things that like purposefully like abnormal decks and things like that like allow you to do cool things. And then they get to the point where they're like, no, I'm not going to do gimmicks ever again. I'm going to stick with, I'm going to just do real cards, real magic tricks and whatnot. And then after they get to the point where like, okay, I could do that, or I could do gimmicks which let me do more things easier and are just as entertaining. So what I'm saying is, don't be afraid to do gimmicks. Like even if you're an experienced player doing it, like focusing on like a one, like I'm not saying make a one note character, but it's okay to start at that one point in one note. Like the depth and nuance and personality, like depth of personality will come later. Don't try to make that all at once at first. Like, and also if you're trying to make a memorable character, you can't really just do that by making every every single character like deep and nuanced and like realistic. It's okay to have a non-realistic character. Like have a character who's going into it, like their main thing is that they want it. I'm playing a shorter than abnormal human fighter who just tries to pick a fight with every single person who is taller than him. And that's my going. Like, it's one personality trait, but like that can inform so much of your like decisions. Like, so much of your personality can come from that like one gimmick, where it's like, this person probably is like sensitive about their height. They probably are quick to anger. They're quick to action. They're very, very decisive and things like that. They're not one for talking and stuff like that. And how that one gimmick just informs so much of your character. And like, I could run in and run that character and like know generally how I want to roleplay him. And is he just gonna stick like that for the entire campaign? I mean, of course not. But yeah, no. And you can find like a lot of generators online that will help you find like character quirks and things like that. That like you just need one or two, and that is a great springboard for finding out a personality. Because that's one of the hardest things when getting into the game, honestly, isn't learning the rules. It isn't figuring out that. It's finding your character's voice and their personality. I'm not talking like actual voice, but like having the actual voice is also a good idea. I do want to do an episode on that, but that would involve me doing voices, and that isn't really conducive to like ASMR. So I don't know how I'm gonna do that, because I do want to do an episode where I like do a bunch of like a lot of my like main voice tricks and stuff like that. I might post that as like specifically like, this is not ASMR, this is for the people in this series benefit. Do not listen to this for ASMR, this is information only. Lily makes a fool of herself doing a bunch of her D&D dealing voices. But helping find like what your personalities and stuff is really hard to do, and having a few of those character traits built in is really nice. And then honestly, in terms of personality, there's really one other thing that you really need to know, and that is what motivates your character. Let's try to like, or even going back to the gimmick things, like what does your character want right now at the beginning of the campaign? Like you could be like, because a lot of like things like be like, oh, my character is motivated by wanting to know as much as they are in the world. Okay, that's lovely, but that doesn't really give your character any like starting motivations. But if your character motivation is say, ooh, I always heard my character's motivation is I'm a halfling wizard, and my teacher who taught me everything I knew, but shortly before his passing, he kept speaking of this ancient orcish scroll that was found and that was lost in the hill in one of the barrows near the town we're in. And I really want to find this to learn this knowledge. Like, you still get that, like, I want to seek out the mysteries of the universe and stuff like that, but it's tied into something specific. Also, let the DM know that, because like that's great, because that's like you're helping the DM out and like having like this own personal motivation, because that gives them a potential adventure idea. It gives you a reason to be with other people. Like, why did you join an adventure group? Because like maybe you want to like have some extra muscle when like digging around some ancient orcish barrows before going in there, and all of a sudden that one motivation like informs a lot of things about your character. So I guess kind of like other thing I've been talking about personality wise is that choose specific examples over broad generalizations, because they will actually help you get both to those broad examples as well as concrete action. I'm thinking about like who you are. Yeah. And that's one thing is where I find also a lot of characters will, like, players will build their character mechanically and then build the personality. And I find that's something I almost always do, sometimes do too, when I'm building characters on my own. I find that building with other people helps, because when you build characters with other people, you do it slower. And when you do it slower, why is it slower? Because you're talking and you're bouncing ideas back and forth. And one of that thing that can really help is building your character's personality in tandem with mechanics. And when you can build it with mechanics and like the mechanics and personality at the same time, like they can inform each other. Where it's like when you get to like choosing your feats for that level, kind of like the personality that you chose, or like I want to find this scroll, things like that. Um, like, like, do we want to like either can actually that's a better one, but words that mean things. Gosh, I lost my track of thought. But yeah, no, what I'm saying is like they can form what you choose in terms of like feats and abilities and stuff, but also those feats and abilities you find like, okay, so I'm choosing this like this feat that lets me, I'm just making something up, that like, okay, we're playing this halfling wizard, but I chose this feat that lets me let's say I just like be able to decipher, like helps me in like deciphering ancient runes and whatnot. And okay, so like that like gives me an extra edge up, because it's like it makes sense with like my like fascination with this scroll and like what my deceased teacher might have taught me. But it also gives me like kind of like this almost other aspect of like I'm fascinated by like the like ancient and history in general, and kind of like that specific tied in where like now my character is almost being more like of a historian edge to like I am a halfling wizard who is also a historian, and like that helps inform future decisions where it's like, okay, I'm going to my skills, I'm going to take ranks in things like history or in like knowledge nobility and things like that, looking at like the very like think like very the academic side of learning those things. So yeah, and yeah, trying to think if there's any other like more abstract tips for building your first character. Like generally, I would say casters are harder than non-casters, so it's typically easier to play things like fighters and rangers and like half casters where they might have spells, but it's like a lesser part of things. So things like paladins and stuff like that. I guess rangers are technically half casters, depending on what edition you're in. But like yeah, that sort of thing where it's those are easier to play, but you shouldn't be discouraged by casters. Just know that going into there. Like if you haven't played a lot of games before, either video games or just like board games, probably want to stay towards more mechanically simple characters. But I mean, you can also build casters to be easier. Like you don't have to have a wizard which is all about combos and whatnot. You can be a wizard that's just like, I am packing magic missiles and there's nothing that's gonna stop me. And like that's okay. Like that's what the character like, and the other players in your team can help you with if you really want to do that. But just know that it can be easier just to like for your first character playing like a simpler class. But yeah, well, I think that's it for that I can think of that I wanted to talk about for just my general tips for building your first character. But yeah, like, but I just can't reiterate: communicate with your dungeon master, communicate with your other players. Communication is key. In all of D&D, like not just character creation. It helps with like figuring out interpersonal relationships, scheduling, and all that. And listen to what they have to say. Don't become married to any one idea or like concept, like, and be open to change, both during the creation process and as time goes on. Also, especially in your new player, don't be worried about making the wrong decision. If you really don't like one feat that you chose, you can usually talk to your dungeon master and be like, okay, can I like switch this out like the next time we level up? A lot of net editions nowadays actually has that as built-in mechanics and things like that. So you can be sure and communicate with them for things like that. And honestly, if worse comes to worse, and you're like, if it comes like a couple months later, and you're like, I really don't like this character, talk to your DM about it. I know like I've had several players tell me that, and like they're like, I actually didn't like this character, and they'll work with you and being like, okay, is there anything we can do to change your character mechanically or story wise? And if not, we could find a way for your character to exit the story via by like some roleplay reason where they leave, or them like the classic one of them just dying. And then we can bring in a new character that you want to try. You can try them out, and yeah. So, what else? I think that brings it all to this episode of D&D Basics. Let me know if there's any other specific topics you want me to talk about. I have quite a few other topics I want to talk about in terms of things like getting into role play, that whole thing about like voices and things like that. That I can make up. But if you have any other questions, let me know. Especially when it comes to a bit more like very specialized topics and things like that. Like if you really want to know more about like how do I differentiate barbarians and like things like that. Like I don't want to play every barbarian as like just a hot-headed guy. Just let me know. Like I can make a video on that and things like that. I might not make it just about barbarians. I might just make it like how to how tips on role playing like melee characters and things like that. But yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe learned something. So, but until the next time, I hope you have a wonderful night's sleep. And